Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about the state of the comic industry and how no matter what happens with this shutdown, the comic industry is not going to change. And this does affect what I normally talk about, which is heroes, because if the comic industry doesn't change in some way, we're never going to get good hero stories. But what I want to focus on is the fact that a lot of people are making demands of the comic industry saying, get your act together and we'll have a healthy industry again. You have a lot of comic shops saying, we need X, Y, and Z. We have a lot of independent people saying, if we had returnable comics again, then this would fix the industry. But I'm here to tell you that none of that's going to fix the industry. Even if we got the holy grail of returnable comics once again, it's not going to change the industry. It might have 10 years ago, 20 years ago certainly, but today it's not going to help. And this whole thing rests upon the mistaken assumption that the comic industry is an industry in itself. So I should use quote unquote industry, because it's not an actual industry in itself anymore. Comics have simply become a department of a larger entertainment industry. They're basically the sort of research and development department of certain kinds of entertainment, the largest forms being movies and television. And just as it would be ridiculous to say, I want to save the sporting department of this department store separate from all of the rest of the department store, you can't say, I want to save comics outside of the actual industry of entertainment. It doesn't work that way, because just like the sports department in the department store is not an actual store in itself, the comic industry is not itself an industry anymore. It is simply a subsection department of the larger entertainment industry. So again, all of these statements about we need to fix the industry by doing X, Y, and Z are going to come to nothing, because they proceed upon the false assumption that the comic industry is still an industry in itself, is still independent, and can be fixed as an industry. So there are several layers to this, but it all comes down to the fact that what the comic quote-unquote industry is producing is not a product for individual customers. Now we can see this flat out when you look at most of the demands given by the comic stores, because the comic stores themselves are looking at themselves as the customer for the comics. They're not asking for things that will make the comic buyer's life better. No, that's their job as their little shop. They want the comic industry to make it easier on them as the buyer of comics. And they're asking for things that will simply make their businesses better. So if you look at many of these demands of the comic stores, we want the industry to stop with these constant reboots. We want these multiple covers gone. We want these constant number ones that keep coming out to be discarded. All of these things that they want is to make it easier for them as a shop to sell the comic book. This has nothing to do with you as an individual customer. Everything that they're asking of the comic industry is for their own good and not for the customer's good. Because there's one thing that no one really is asking for, no one certainly above the individual, and that would be better stories. I don't hear that coming from anyone. No one is saying, give us better stories, therefore we can sell these easier. Certainly the comic shops are not saying that. Why? Because if these comics could be sold easier through better stories, then they can be gotten around. Marvel or DC or the other independent companies could find a way around of going through them to distribute the comics. So it's within the interest of the comic shops to make sure that there is a slight disconnect between what the individual customer wants and what the comic industry is producing. Why? Because if the industry was actually listening directly to the customer and giving the customer exactly what they wanted, then there would be no need, really, for comic shops. Certainly that need would be much, much less. But really, even all of that is just one small symptom of a much bigger problem. And the much bigger problem, again, is the fact that the comic industry is not an industry in itself. It simply serves a bigger industry. Now what I'm going to do is look at that question and apply to it, as I have done a number of times over the history of my channel. I'm going to apply to it an economic model. For anybody who knows the history of economics, it's a Dodsian model. So I'm taking the E.R. Dodds model and applying it and saying, why are these people doing what they are doing? And to answer that question, you look at the simplest way that they can make money, or the easiest way that they can make money, and then produce the results that they're looking for. So in doing that, as I have done before in previous videos, there is one thing that makes it very clear that the comic industry is not itself an independent industry anymore. And it's the fact that sales don't matter. And I'm sure a few people are saying to themselves, well, they're going to matter after this because their sales numbers are going to drop so dramatically. Or they're saying, if we only got returnable comics, that would mean sales mattered again, and therefore it would become a healthy industry. And again, I'm saying that, no, it doesn't matter. Even if we get to the point of returnable comics again, it's not going to matter. And I know this because I've covered the numbers for comics and cancellations for about 2 years now. And when I started, I went back another 2 to 3 years prior to when I was doing that first video. And if you go over the shipping numbers for comics, you could see that there was still a hard line where the comic company was drawing a line and saying, okay, if you fall below this shipping number, then your book is going to be canceled. But 5 years ago, that number was around 12,000. Then it fell to 10,000. Then it fell to 9,000. Then it fell to 8,000. Now it's down somewhere around 6,000. So if your book is shipping somewhere less than 6,000 copies, especially if you're one of the big two, you're going to get canceled. Now, 2 points. Number one, there were different cancellation numbers for different kinds of comics. If you had something like Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, that comic, presumably since it was targeted at children, had a much lower cancellation number, or was exempt from this cancellation number altogether, so that it could keep producing these comics. But the other straight superhero comics, it seemed like they had to adhere to this number. And when I say that, you may be saying to yourself, well, that's good. They have a cancellation number. That means that they're actually looking at sales. But I would say no. No, they're not looking at sales. And the fact that the cancellation number keeps on dropping and dropping and dropping over time just shows to me that it doesn't matter how low their numbers are going to go. They're still not going to stop producing garbage, because they could have turned around at 12,000 shipped and say, if we're canceling a lot of things below this number, shouldn't we make a better product? But they didn't. They just dropped the number down to 10,000. And the same thing with 10,000. They could have stopped there and said, shouldn't we take this as a hint that we should be producing better comics? But they didn't. They simply dropped the number down again, and then again, and then again. If they have to drop that number down to 2,000, I still don't think they're going to change what they're doing for making comics. That is to say, they're not going to make better stories. If, again, we get this holy grail of returnable comics, well, first of all, I think that might actually put their shipping numbers up, because people will say, well, look, I don't have to sell these. Sure, I'll order 10. And they're just going to give us the shipping numbers and hide the numbers of actual sales, or they're just going to get rid of those numbers altogether. But the point is that no matter how low the shipping numbers and the sales numbers and the sales figures get, they're still not going to change. And why? Well, I did an entire video about this. The why is because for the comic industry, money is no longer their goal. Influence is their goal. Again, their currency is not dollar bills anymore. Their currency is influence. And it's a very specific kind of influence. It's the influence of a research and development section of a larger industry. And there's a very specific model for this, which I'll get to, but before I can even get there, the question has to be asked and answered, why exactly are they putting all of this quote-unquote progressive stuff into their comics? Why won't that change? Why will that continue no matter how low the sales numbers go? Well, there's a good economic reason for that. And the economic reason for that is if you have an audience who actually employs critical thinking and is rational and logical and actually thinks about your product, well, that's a dangerous kind of audience to have, because they believe in constructive criticism. And no matter what you produce for them, even if they like it, even if they think it's the best thing since sliced bread, they're still going to look at it and say, it could be better. They're going to poke holes in it and say, this and this and this should be dealt with. You should make this product better. And they're always going to demand something better. Because in using their reason and logic, they can obviously see the holes in what you are producing and use that to demand a better product. So dealing with critical thinkers as a customer base is right out the window. But dealing with progressive thinkers is exactly what you need. Why? Because the whole progressive ideology only makes sense in a self-referential, pat each other on the back, support each other kind of way. This ideology makes no sense when you apply reason and logic to it. And it makes even less sense when you try to apply it to reality. So the only way that they can continue to promote this ideology as if it were true is to hide all of its faults, is to hide all of its mistakes, and to use its allies, people who think like they do, to try to convince people that everything is okay and this thing actually works. So built into this progressive ideology is a mutual admiration society. Because again, everyone who believes this ideology must support everyone else who believes this ideology in some amorphous way anyways, in order for the whole thing to look like it actually can stand on its own. And this is exactly the kind of people you want supporting your industry. Why? Because it doesn't matter what mistakes you make. It doesn't matter how poor your product is. They're still going to praise it. They're still going to go out of their way to cover up the problems with it. So certainly, yes, there are emotional, passion reasons why the entertainment industry is and has for a long time glommed onto this progressive mindset, and those emotional, vice-ridden reasons are because they simply want to be hedonistic. But besides that, if you look at it purely disimpassioned, if you look at it purely in an economic way, there is a very specific economic advantage to dealing with such people and producing such a product. But, as I said a few minutes ago, this whole thing only works if they exclude money as their end goal and make their end goal something like influence, which is exactly what is going on. So the model goes as follows. First of all, these people who are producing comic books, these companies, they don't want to spend any money on the production of these things at all. They have to spend some money on it, but they certainly want to spend as little as possible. And they do that by hiring garbage artists and garbage storytellers and garbage colorists and so on down the entire line. They pick the people who are going to cost them the least amount of money possible. And once again, the progressive ideology plays right into this, because they can make these people feel like, or even tell them directly, look, we know we're not paying you a whole lot of money, but you're making a statement. You're making this progressive ideology stronger in the world. And sometimes, it appears, they can even sell that as what they are getting for their work entirely. And again, I've done entire videos on this. We had comic pros saying, yeah, that's the entire reason why I got into comics to begin with, was to change the world. Not to make good comics, but to change the world. So you want to hook as many of these people as possible, because you can pay them as low as possible by substituting in the fact that they're making some kind of change in the world for actual money. And once again, you get a progressive team writing a progressive character for a progressive comic. And it doesn't matter if everything that goes into the making of this comic is garbage, because it's not for sale. This is not what the comic is for. When all these comic pros say, this comic is not for you, they literally mean that. Because the book is not for individual customers. Not at all. It's for influence. And a very specific kind of influence. And that kind of influence is praise and accolades. So what happens is, they produce this very cheap progressive comic, and they put it out for, say, 50 issues. Or they keep rebooting it until it has, say, 50 issues. During that time, they keep putting out the message that this is a very progressive book, so they will get progressive people in the rest of media to say, oh, let's do an article about this progressive book. Let's do an article about this progressive character. Those articles lead to quasi-awards, like your Library Association Award, which then in turn leads to bigger awards from things like feminist associations. Again, all of this, all of these accolades, all of this praise, all of these awards and articles, this is the currency that the companies are dealing in. It's not money. They don't care about shipping numbers. They don't care about sales numbers. They don't care about how much money they actually make with these comics. Now, if they do make some money, that's a side bonus, but ultimately they don't care because it is the awards and accolades that they are seeing as their currency for the production of this product. And what is the point of the accumulation of all of these praises, all of these awards, all of these articles? Well, it's to sell up. It's to take these characters and say, well, look, we can tell by all of these awards, all of these articles, all of this praise, that these characters are doing so well that we need to put them into a bigger medium. We need to put them in animated shorts on the internet, and that needs to develop into a cartoon show or a cartoon movie. This is what is happening right now with Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. It was a pathetic book that sold and shipped pathetically during its entire run, and they finally canceled it. But then they said, well, now, since it did so well, we're going to make it into a cartoon show on Disney+. This is the exact same thing that happened with Marvel Rising, and especially the focus character of Marvel Rising, which is Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. This team deals primarily with the following characters: Kamala Khan, Squirrel Girl, Riri Williams, America Chavez, and all of these characters that the majority of people out there reading comics don't like. But when they decided to sell them up into a cartoon, what was the official Marvel line of why they were putting these characters into a bigger medium? The official Marvel line was, because these are the characters that are doing so well right now. Because, of course, and they've shown this through multiple statements, by the way, what their definition of doing well isn't sales numbers, isn't generating an audience, isn't actually pleasing the majority of the comic buying public. No, it's getting awards and praises. And again, once they take these characters and put them into the bigger medium of a cartoon show, then they're going to say, look, we've done so well with that. Look at all the praise and awards we're getting for that. Now let's move this character into an actual television show on Disney+. Let's move this character into the movies. This, as most of you probably know already, is exactly what is going on right now with Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. Again, they took this character, which no one liked in the comic books, but they kept on and keep on producing comic books over and over again that get canceled and no one buys because they wanted all these praise and accolades. They used that praise and accolades to bring this character into internet shorts and then into a cartoon movie where she was the leader of a team of Marvel Rising. And now their plans are to bring her into a television show, which will then tie in with the movies, and then she will be in the movies. So this is the point of the praise and accolades, to sell up. And so comics themselves, again, they are the research and development wing of bringing these characters into this point where they will sell up. It's not about you, the individual customer, in any way, or your money. Now, I know this is going to be a long video, but I have to get into the next step, because a lot of you are probably saying to yourself, well, look, at some point, these movies are going to tank with these characters, and therefore, all of this is for naught. But really, again, you have to look at the Disney model in order to understand what is going on here. First of all, this doesn't just work for Marvel. DC is doing the same thing and not looking at money but looking at awards because they want to bring their characters into the CW and into television. That's what they want to do. If you look at the smaller companies, if you look at a company like Valiant, this is their stated goal. They're producing comics as a generator of ideas so that they can get television shows. This is what they have stated that they are producing comics for. So yes, it affects more than just Marvel, but Marvel takes it to the extreme. And to get back to the point where people are saying, well, these movies are eventually going to tank and then it doesn't matter, so all of this is going to be driven into the ground and it's going to blow up in their faces. But I would say no, because if you look at certainly Disney as a whole, what's their product model over the years? Well, their product model over the years is to take a large section of entertainment and turn it into amusement parks. Because within the amusement parks, you can get people blindly, like sheep, driving through the turnstiles, handing over wads of cash, and then you can sell them slave labor t-shirts, which cost $2 to produce, and they sell you for $30. Again, economically, what is Disney trying to do? Well, they're trying to sell you nothing for something. This is the ultimate economic model, to sell you nothing for something. The nothing that they sell you is nostalgia. Nostalgia, at some point, cost them little to nothing. So again, if we look at the history of Disney itself, what did they originally do? Well, they took a gold mine of fairy tales and turned them into entertainment. And then they moved on from that gold mine, once it had been exhausted, into things like tall tales and books and characters that were more recent that they could also sell. So the first wave was fairy tales. The second wave was Winnie the Pooh and Peter Pan. And then after all of that was exhausted as well, then they started to produce their own characters and try to make them part of what they were selling as well. That's when you got movies like The Rescuers and 101 Dalmatians. These things that didn't do very well. And so what they did was they took this model, which began with a gold mine that they didn't actually have to pay anything for, and they simply ran the model into the ground. And the point was to run the model into the ground. Why? Because at that point where it gets run into the ground, then they can simply sell nostalgia instead of actually producing entertainment. And of course, they sell this nostalgia through the cheapest means possible, and that's through what they call theme parks. But what is a theme park? Well, it's just an upscale version of Carney's. It's just an upscale version of your local fair, or the old circus that used to come through town. And of course, all of these things, the circus, the fair, the little traveling band of carnies, these people were the pioneers of selling you nothing for something, of giving you as little as possible for as much money as possible. So they took that model and they applied it to the nostalgia of the entertainment that they had previously produced. And after that, all they needed to do was to keep the nostalgia flowing, to produce nothing new whatsoever, but to sell you that nostalgia through these theme parks. And that's exactly the same model that they are now applying to Marvel and to Star Wars, I would say. Now, I don't know that much about Star Wars, but with Marvel, you can already see this happening. They started with the gold mine of the old stories of Marvel Comics. But now, we've gotten to that Rescuers and 101 Dalmatian point, where they're trying to make their own characters, and of course they're not doing well, and they're not very well produced, and really, they're going to be forgotten by most people. But again, that's not the point. The point is, they've exhausted their gold mine, and they're going to keep on running this thing right into the ground, just so that they can have this large treasure trove of entertainment that they can then turn into theme parks. And this has already happened. Again, I've done videos on this. You already have Marvel-themed cruise lines put out by Disney. You already have the first theme parks opening last year. You already have a slate of about 5 more theme parks supposedly ready to open once everything starts to get back to normal. So for those people who are saying these movies are going to tank and it's going to blow up in their faces, this is their actual model. This is what they're trying to do. They don't want to produce entertainment anymore. They will produce enough entertainment and put it out there so well and all over the world so that this becomes an ingrained part of nostalgia for supposedly the entire world, so they can sell you nostalgia, which costs nothing. So the future failure of the movie industry, and to some extent the television industry with superheroes, that future failure doesn't matter. Disney knows what it's doing, it has an economic plan, and that future failure would be part and parcel of their entire operation. So the failure of those things isn't going to change comics. Just like the fact that the failure of the so-called comic industry that we see now isn't going to change comics either. Because you've probably lost where comics actually comes into this entire thing that I'm talking about. And that's really the point. Comics get lost in this entire system because they're just a minute part of this larger entertainment system. And as I said at the first, it's really a non sequitur to say, how do we save the comic industry? Because there is no saving the comic industry, because it doesn't actually exist anymore. It's like saying, how do we save the sports department when the department store goes under? You can't. And so, after having gone over all of that, some people have been saying to me over the last little while, look, you give us nothing positive. What's your answer for this? How do we save the industry? Well, first of all, again, there is no industry to save. It's gone. The positive point of how we are supposed to produce good comics is simply that. to produce good comics. And the point where the progressive ideology comes into this is where we should look for our direction. We should do the exact opposite of what they are doing. Because your progressive ideology, what is it built upon? Well, it's built upon destruction. And that destruction has a very specific form right now. It's called critical theory. That is to say, you have to criticize something and hack away at its support system little by little with this criticism, and that will eventually cause the destruction of this thing that you are criticizing. And one of the underlying points of this idea is that all criticism is negative. There is no such thing within the system as constructive criticism. And again, the whole point is destruction. So how do we get good comics back? Well, it's simple. It's laborious, but it's simple. Number one, we make sure that constructive criticism is actually listened to, and constructive criticism is, of course, for the purpose of constructing something. It's not for destruction, it's for creation. I myself have written a story, I have hired an artist, and we are producing a comic together. It is a comic generated from the uplifting ideal of being a hero, and in its production, it will put the customer first. And so that's my positive solution. If you're not able to produce something on your own, then make sure when you criticize, it's constructive criticism so that others can produce a better product. And if you can create, get out there and create. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all of this. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.